One question that Darwin could not answer in his day was, where does all the variation come from? He could look around him in the natural world and see the variation, but he didn't know where it came from. And we now know that mutations produce new alleles. Most of the time, mutations are harmful and hurt an organism, but on rare occasion it can be helpful. Houseflies have a mutation to DDT. The same mutation causes them to grow more slowly, and so in the absence of DDT, this is a harmful mutation and not helpful. But once DDT was discovered and introduced, this mutation became favorable, and natural selection increased its frequency in the fly populations. Sometimes a mutation causes a gene to be duplicated. Evolution can then work on this over long time spans and make new genes. For example, the gene for detecting odors was duplicated and then altered, so that one single gene now became over 1,300 genes. So odor detection was going to be very important in mice, so they could see, they could smell things in the dark, I guess. And so having an extra odor detector really helped them out. And so that gene was propagated through the population. In organisms that produce sexually, most of the genetic variation in a population results from the unique combination of alleles that each individual inherits. We find that populations are the units of evolution. A population is a group of individuals of the same species living at the same place at the same time. So now a species is a group in the population of individuals who can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Population genetics shows how populations change genetically over time. And so we have some terms. We've got a gene pool, which is a total collection of all the genes in the population at that one time. And we've got a new term, microevolution. It's a change of the relative frequencies of alleles in the gene pool. Now, if the population is not evolving, the gene pool will remain constant. So in microevolution is a very, it's kind of like a mini evolution, just a little bit of evolution. So we're going to look at the three mechanisms of microevolution. We're going to look at natural selection, genetic drift, gene flow. We'll also look at sexual selection. I guess there are four. Natural selection is the first one. Variation exists among individuals, and some will produce more offspring, changing the frequency of alleles in the next generation. This can lead to adaptive evolution and a better fit between the organisms and their environment. This process is not random. The fittest individuals produce the largest number of viable, meaning living, fertile offspring. Okay, the second one we're going to look at is genetic drift. And genetic drift is a change in the gene pool due to pure chance. This is random, and it happens more in small populations. So the first genetic drift is bottleneck. This happens to populations who've been through trauma. So we have a catastrophe, and we have a dramatic reduction in the population size. So even if the population recovers, it'll have low levels of genetic variability. So let's look at this bottle. In here we've got purple, orange, and green marbles. If we only shake a few out, we end up with just purple and green marbles. And even if this population recovers, it has lost, the orange allele has been lost. And the ensuing population will have less variability. The other, and here's prairie chicken. I was going to talk about the prairie chicken. It's called the greater prairie chicken, and its population use plummeted. And by 1993, there were only 2 populations in Illinois, both with fewer than 50 birds. Less than 50% of the eggs hatched, so they really weren't having much luck having babies. And when they compared the DNA of these birds to museum specimens, the modern birds had lost 30% of their alleles, and the reduced genetic variability was increasing harmful alleles and giving us a very low hatching rate. So this is what happens when you go through a bottleneck. So many of these birds were killed that they didn't survive. Okay, they actually did survive. We'll hear about them in just a minute. The founder effect is very similar to a bottleneck. It happens when a few individuals colonize frequently an island, and the small group may not represent all the genes in the population they left, or they may overrepresent a gene. There's this little island here in the middle of the South Atlantic, and it was colonized by some guys from England in 1814. 15 people went there to live. One of them carried a recessive allele for the progressive rare form of blindness. And in 1960, 240 of the descendants, people still living there, 4 had the disorder, and at least 9 were known carriers. This is a frequency 10 times higher than the rest of the population. So because that gene was overrepresented in the 15 people that colonized the island, it was allowed to propagate and cause more problems. Back to the greater prairie chickens. These birds were some additional birds were brought into Illinois, and they were able to increase their genetic diversity, and they were able to save the birds by increasing the hatch rate. Okay, so natural selection can alter variation in 3 different ways. We can have stabilizing selection, and stabilizing selection, example here is human birth weight. Babies that are very heavy do not survive as well, and babies that are not heavy enough don't survive very well. And so there's a kind of a sweet spot where an intermediate is the more favored. Directional selection acts against individuals at one extreme. And so the population evolves in a directional manner. In this case, we've got the example of cliff swallows. The original population is here in blue, and the purple ones were the ones that survived a very cold winter. And so the ones with higher body weight survive the winter. That will shift the population to being heavier. We can also have disruptive selection. And here we're looking at African black-bellied finches, and the black-bellied finches, 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 the black- The finches with very small beaks feed on soft seeds, and those with large beaks feed on hard seeds, and they're more likely to survive than the ones that have medium-sized beaks. So having your beak specialized to small seeds or specialized to large seeds is an advantage, and the ones in here don't do very well. The ones that survived are here and here, and width of the beak will increase. So sexual selection is a type of natural selection, and this is the selection that gives us the sexual dimorphism. Sexual dimorphism being the secondary sexual characteristics not associated with reproduction. Frequently, this is a size difference. The male of the species will be larger than the female. In birds, frequently the male will have beautiful plumage that the female will lack. You see the beautiful peacock here and the very drab peahen. Intersexual selection is a contest between animals, usually the males for a harem. So if you've got wild mustangs, for instance, you'll have a bunch of females and you'll have one male. And the males will fight for that position to keep all those females to himself. The same thing happens in a pride of lions. Intersexual is much more common in its mate choice, usually the female choosing which male to breed with. Many traits are preferred by females. For example, the blue feet of the bobby and long tails of the blue bobby relate to overall good male health. And these things have been correlated.